pleasure to welcome you all here to the DuSable Museum of African American History for the very first in our installment of public programs surrounding this absolutely amazing, engaging, and living exhibition called The Love Affair Continues. And at the helm of this exhibition is the lovely Juarez Hawkins, who is here with us today. And I'd like to give you a little bit of background information on Ms. Hawkins. She is, amongst many things, a native of Chicago, an artist, educator, and curator. She received a BA from Northwestern University and an MA in Interdisciplinary Art from Columbia College in Chicago. Her work examines the evolution of identity, spirituality, and the body. That's an amazing combination. I like that. Juarez has exhibited widely, hosting solo exhibitions at Concordia University, the 33rd Collective Gallery, and the Southside Community Arts Center. She is a member of Sapphire and Crystals, a collective of African-American female artists. Juarez also serves as a lecturer and co-curator of gallery programs at Chicago State University. If you all could please help me welcome Juarez Hawkins. Juarez.
Thank you, Erica. She makes me sound so good. Wow. I'm keeping her. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. My name is Juarez Hawkins, and I was working on how to frame this work, what to say, what to talk about, and so on. And what I decided on was to put this in somewhat of a historical context, so that we can talk a little bit about the history of African American art in Bronzeville. And ever so slyly, I'll start fitting in work from this exhibition and from other contemporary artists, so that you can see that what we're trying to do here is part of a broader historical continuum. One of the things that I do, I teach African American art at Chicago State. Yes, we're still standing. Yes, we still exist. Yes, we're alive and well. Okay. That being said, one of the things I do is I teach African American art. And part of the reason I started doing it, because I'm not a historian, I do not have a PhD in art history, I'm an artist, curator, and all that other stuff, but I'm not a historian. However, I felt that it was really a shame that our African American art majors were taught everyone else's history except their own. And so with that in mind, I developed an African American art class. So if there are historical omissions or dates or artists that you feel that I need to add into my presentations, by all means, let me know, because this is a work that's going to be eternally in progress or in process. Because the more I learn about my own history, the more fascinated I am with it. So hopefully I can share a little bit of that with you too. I'm kind of relaxed and informal, hence titles like Evolution of Visual Arts from the Hood, because that's really what it boils down to. Let's see if I can get that to work. Ooh, let's see, hit the machine, Juarez. Hang on, let's get the technology to work. Okay, there it is. Yeah, okay, very good. And so part of what I talk about when I'm dealing with this particular class is this idea of when African American art began in the United States. Well, really it began back around the 17th century, sometime around the time that our ancestors were being brought here, and you look at the homes of folks like Thomas Jefferson and the quilts and the houses and all those things, then there's certainly black hands involved. So certainly black art in America has been here for a good long time. But there's a bit of a misnomer, there's a misconception that a lot of our art really began in the 1920s with the Harlem Renaissance. And that's lovely, there's nothing wrong with the history of Harlem and so on. But oftentimes that clouds the fact that we have a very vibrant, alive, and vital arts community and art workings right here in Chicago, concurrent with Harlem, even before when they've documented this Renaissance, that Renaissance over there on the East Coast. In fact, there's documents that say as far back as 1905, African American artists were not only practicing in Chicago, but also putting together collectives, putting together groups to support one another, holding classes and workshops and seminars to develop professionally. So we'll give you a little bit of that history, and again, as I go, I'm going to plug in a few contemporaries as I go as well. So let's see. We're going to start with the early years, and with the formation of the Chicago Art League in 1923. This organization was founded by two artists, one William Farrell, and another artist who I'm going to show you named William Edward Scott. And so again, they got together meeting for the same reason artists, meet today, to support one another, to provide opportunities for each other. Because again, you're talking not just past the turn of the century. It's not like we had a lot of Michigan Avenue galleries that were representing the work of African American artists. So oftentimes we had to create opportunities for ourselves or help one another seek things out. So give you a little background on some of these key notables that came through the Chicago Art League. This first one, this is William Edward Scott. And a number of these folks, Scott and his colleagues, a number of them came through the School of the Art Institute. The School of the Art Institute is noted as being one of the few places in the city, or really probably in the country, where African American students could enroll. Because remember, during this time, outside the HBCUs, a lot of these schools were still, had discriminatory practices, and a lot of times African American students could not enroll. So the SAIC, or the School of the Art Institute, actually welcomed a number of African American students, and so a number of them have come through, and a number of them went on to achieve fame and greatness. So William Edward Scott was one of those artists. So as you notice, not only did he study at the Art Institute, but he was fortunate enough to make what we call the Grand Tour. Artists of his generation, both black and white, often went to Paris and to Rome and to London and places like that in Europe, because at that time Europe was seen as the center of the art world. So if you as an art student wanted to really hone your chops and learn some things, then you went abroad to study with the masters, and if you were lucky, you were selected by the chosen few to be included in one of the many salons, which could really make or break an artist's career. So here, for us to have an African American artist not only doing wonderful things here in the States, but actually going abroad and making things happen and being accepted into these great salons, which again, they're not paying so much attention to his color, but the caliber of his work. They're saying, oh, oui, my God, your work, monsieur, it's as good as anyone else's up in here. Put that on the wall, give him some hug. And also, he's someone, one of the things I teach in my class that I'm developing is something I call 6 Degrees of Henry Tanner. You guys know who Henry Ossawa Tanner is. If not, Google him. In fact, just as a sidebar, if there are artists this evening who you're interested in, by all means give them a Google. Most of these artists are, world history, world renowned, so you'll be able to find them. Okay, so let's see. So I mentioned, so not only does he have this illustrious history, but as I mentioned in my 6 Degrees of Henry Tanner, this guy here is one of those 6 degrees, because when Henry Tanner migrated to Paris, he became kind of the, I guess, everyone's godfather. So if I were going to send my daughter to Paris to study and take the Grand Tour, I might hook up with Henry Tanner and say, hey, my daughter's coming, look out for her, make sure she has a place to stay. So when William Edward Scott made it over there, who did he look up but Henry Ossawa Tanner? So not only does he get a place to crash on, Tanner's living room or something like that, but also is getting an opportunity to study with, again, one of the world's most renowned painters, not just most renowned African American artists, but renowned painters worldwide, because Tanner had been well established in Paris and was doing his own thing by the time William Edward Scott made it over there. So let's see, a little bit of his work, shall we? Let's see if I get this right. Okay, so he's known for these kind of historical paintings, like this famous one of Frederick Douglass making his appeal to Abraham Lincoln, and you guys know the story of Frederick Douglass. Again, if you don't, please look it up. He also did a number of murals. We're going to talk a little bit about the WPA shortly, and a lot of artists were commissioned to do murals in public places. This one was at the Wabash YMCA. Scott made a trip to Haiti, and a number of artists often travel to different lands. They may have gotten like fellowships to study. You've heard of the Rosenwald Foundation, Guggenheim Foundation, and so on. And these kinds of foundations gave artists money where they can go abroad and study. So William Edward Scott made a trip to Haiti. And oftentimes what we've noticed, I've seen a trend where these trips to these countries change the style of these artists. Oftentimes the palette gets vibrant and brighter. Now you can check for yourselves, all you armchair scholars out there. I see it in the work of William Edward Scott, because again, look how much brighter, how much orange and liveliness and light there is in his palette compared to those, particularly the work that you saw earlier here, which is very classic and so on. And you see that also, just as a sidebar, in the work of Lois Mailou Jones. You also see it in the work of Henry Tanner. If you look at the work that he did when he traveled to the Middle East and he studied in Tangiers, you will see again this brightening of the palette, this liveliness that shows up in the work. But I move on. Another member of the Chicago Art League is Charles Dawson. This is a name that we don't hear as much, which is really kind of a shame. Part of it is because Dawson worked more as a graphic artist. He was more of a commercial artist, meaning that he put his artistic talents to creating advertisements, images for products. So just so happens, if you have a can of Murray's pomade, you have a piece of African American art in your house. And, give a sister a call. We can go and hit that up on Antiques Roadshow. But these are some of the things that Charles Dawson designed. So he too, like William Edward Scott, was a product of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He was also a colleague of Archibald Motley. I'll use the word colleague loosely. I'll just say they both went to school at the same time. They weren't necessarily the best of friends. But again, just to give you a historical time frame, they're operating about at the same time. So when you see graphic design, this is often the sort of things that we see, this sort of merger of image and type. So this particular advertisement was for the Negro Week in Art. This was hosted at the Art Institute, and this, I believe, 1927. But this was marking one of the first shows of African American art in a major museum. Because again, remember, slavery ended when? 1865. So we're not that far removed from the end of slavery and Reconstruction. So it's not like, African Americans were free and all of a sudden equality just popped up. So it's still a long struggle, and this is also evident in the arts. So for something like this to happen, again, it's showing the forward thinking of the Art Institute, as well as these folks who started to say, hey, some of these guys have a lot of potential. One of the artists that showed at this exposition was Henry Ossawa Tanner. They also featured a lot of African art as well. So it was a cultural expedition, and again, an African American designer at the helm of it. Just as another sidebar, there's going to be a major show of African American design at the Chicago Culture Center. That's going to open later this month. Keep an eye on it. It's free. It should be good. Also, too, there is a Dawson painting here in the DuSable. If you've been upstairs in the historical exhibition, there's a painting of a black woman who sold the war bonds. That's Dawson. So go look for it when you get a chance to take it out. But also, in addition to his graphic design, often old school graphic designers really had to have a broad range of skills, because back then we weren't doing it on the computer. You couldn't Photoshop it the way you do now. So a graphic designer oftentimes was not only talented in typography and layout, but oftentimes had to have a certain design skill, which oftentimes meant they had to be pretty decent painters and draftsmen as well. Here's a piece that you probably didn't know you associate with Charles Dawson. This piece here, The Crisis, The Last Marble. I get a kick out of this piece, one, because it's this really lovely, eloquent statement of childhood, and sort of a game that, okay, I know we have some young people in the house who have no idea about how to play marbles and nothing like that, and that's okay. Before there was Nintendo and Xbox and all those things, children played with marbles, and we made games, and we actually played outdoors and stuff. You can see me after class, that's a separate lecture. But what also stands out is the technical ability of this man, because this is a watercolor painting, folks. And so to try to get an understanding of how tricky it is to paint with watercolor, imagine painting with Kool-Aid. Pour yourself a glass of Kool-Aid, get a paintbrush and try to paint with it. That's how slippery that medium is. So to be able to control it, you really have to have a good command not only of the watercolor, but also of your drawing. So again, it's a testament to this man's skill, and I'll encourage you to give him a Google. Again, he's a colleague of Archibald Motley that's not getting nowhere near the attention that his work deserves. Another colleague that's coming through the Chicago Art League is the ever so fine Richmond Barthet. This is him at work. So you will see not only is he really easy on the eyes, but he's also an immaculate, incredibly skilled sculptor. There's some of his work at the Art Institute. I'm just going to say again another sidebar. If you're looking for African American work in the Art Institute, and they love to trot out their black artists, you want to look in the American wing, because since we are African Americans, it means we are Americans. So if you want to see our art, a lot of it is in the American wing. So I'm just going to give you that sidebar. And among them that's in that wing is Richmond Barthet. So this is him at work. It's a piece that's only begun to fight, because when he's done, his stuff tends to look more like that. Bam. And my students are always like, is that a photograph? It's like, yes, that's a photograph of his sculpture. Look at what the man can do. He's more known for these really stylized, elongated images of dancers. This is one of Benga. Benga was a dancer, and Richmond Barthet often did figures of Benga. He's known for these elongated, very sinuous, very sexy kind of images of young men with lithe bodies and so on. So, you know, just like he was kind of lovely, so was his work. But again, there's a piece of his in the Art Institute. I'll invite you to go check him out. Okay. Now, I missed one. Okay, one artist who did not join up, he's coming out of the School of the Art Institute. He's contemporaries with these artists that I've mentioned before, but he decides he doesn't necessarily want to join up. He doesn't want to be part of the clique. He chooses to be more of a maverick. And so this is Archibald Motley, coming to us out of New Orleans by way of the School of the Art Institute. And very interesting. So again, he's done his part of the grand tour. He's studied abroad and so on, and he comes back here and integrates Inglewood. And he's got an interesting trajectory to his career. Come on in. Your education awaits. So I find that man a chair. Thank you for coming in. I do that with my students all the time. I'll be like, come on in now. Your education awaits. Early in Motley's career, he's very interested in sort of elevating images of black people, as a lot of artists are during that time. His particular angle was on the African Americans who were of mixed race. So you hear the terms like mulatto, quadroon, octoroon. Those are dealing with different percentages of mixes of African American and Caucasian. And so in his early career, there were a number of these images, sort of geared towards showing that there are some segments of the African American population who are refined and who are well dressed and who are very chic and so on. So a lot of his early work and some of the pieces he won awards for were these types of images, very lovely young images, in fact. Over time, he began to explore more kind of like the club scene of the day. You start seeing more paintings of barbecues and nightlife and clubs and jazz and dancing and so on, because these things are beginning to absorb him. There are some people that say he's looking at this world from the outside looking in. Some people may argue that Motley was not quite of the black community. You can argue that yourself, and again, we can discuss that after class. Because there's some of his later work that would certainly belie that assertion, but again, I only have so much time. So here, now that I've given you that little taste of that segment of Chicago, I'm going to give you a taste of some of the contemporary artists who I feel are honoring the spirit of these artists that hold Chicago Art League vibe. Because again, these are artists who are classically trained. Okay, these aren't folks that, you know, we just pulled the, you know, I'm not going to degrade a janitor, but like Palmer Hayden, they like to make bigger the fact he was a janitor who made art in the Harlem Renaissance and so on. But we didn't just sort of pull people out from the street to make this art. These are folks who have gone to college. They're academically trained. They've often trained with some of the best that the Art Institute had to offer. And oftentimes, we have some of that today. So here's Gerald Griffin. Gerald Griffin has a piece in the show. Like the artists that I mentioned before, again, very academically trained, very tight, very refined, very highly realistic style. But also like the artists I mentioned before, still with a bit of a black vision in there. He's taken that classical training and turned an eye towards black physiognomy, black subject matters, black issues that are coming up in his work. So a very rich body of work. And again, I'll encourage you to give him a Google and take a peek at him later in the show. This is Antonio Way. I know somebody said, and I say that too every time I see his work because it's so beautiful and so luscious. Tony comes to us out of American Academy of Art. He also has 2 pieces in this show. So again, kind of what we may say more of an illustrator style, but yet still, you gotta admire the way that man handles a pencil, like that piece that's over on your left, or the way he handles oil painting. Still, just really beautiful, luscious work. And again, in that spirit of artists being trained. It's like, there's nothing wrong with having an education in art. This is Arthur Wright. Arthur also has 2 pieces in this show, and I put him in with the academically trained folks because Arthur Wright is academically trained. Oftentimes you'll see him with his sketchbook. He's often sketching, which is often a way we use to expand our skills. I keep a sketchbook myself. Again, you can see mine after class. But I included him in because his work moves from that sort of formalness into something that's more expressive. You're going to see a lot of collage out of Arthur Wright. You see a lot of color out of him. You see a lot of vibrancy. And kind of like Archibald Motley, a love of jazz. If you look on his website, you'll see tons and tons of paintings and drawings of jazz musicians and performers and so on. He's caught up in that, and him and his sketchbook are out here making it happen. So he's kind of a documentarian, if you will, of the Chicago scene in his own way. Here is Preston Jackson. If we want to honor our sculptors, definitely, you know, Preston Jackson hasn't shown with Diasporal Rhythms, but maybe he will in the future if we ask him real nicely. Preston Jackson headed up the sculpture department at the School of the Art Institute for a number of years, and is an incredibly, I just can't begin to express what a phenomenal sculptor this man is. This particular piece is from a series called Julianne's Garden. And what he did is he collected slave stories from his ancestors throughout his family history. And he made sculptures out of each of these stories. So an exhibition of this would include not only the stories, but as well as these bronze sculptures. Come on in, find a seat, girl. That's all right. You ain't heard nothing. It's all good. And so like this particular piece here, The Lady and the Gator, again, this is coming out of his family history as a young lady who kept an alligator as a pet. And you guys know baby alligators are cute and they're around like that small, they're kind of adorable. But again, she kept it into adulthood and she walking around on a rope just like it was a dog or something. And so rumor has it that one day both the lady and the alligator disappeared. And so we don't know what happened. Some people say, you know, she might have been one of them root-working women working in roots. And some people say, hey, the gator was just being a gator. But again, this is the body of work that Preston Jackson offers. It's absolutely incredible. And again, I invite you to check him out on the website. This is all from the Julianne's Garden series. Come on in.
Good evening.
You're welcome. Come on. Thank you for coming out. Let's find those folks some seeds.
Excuse me.
Okay. If you ride on the red line, I know most of you guys, you don't have cars and stuff, but it might be fun just to take a quick ride on the red line. A number of the stops on CTA have been sort of, I don't want to say decorated, enhanced by living artists. At the 69th Street stop at the red line, you'll find a Preston Jackson. This is called Need to Remember, and this is part of his tribute to Bronzeville and those memories. So on one side, you've got the couple sort of slow dancing. On the other side, there's a girl getting her hair braided. So it's really a beautiful piece, and you'd really be amazed how much of the contemporary black art scene is being represented in public art. Just as another sidebar, there's if you're at 87, there's another piece by an African-American artist named Tom Lucas. So just putting it out there, things to look for, things to watch for as you're traveling out here. Alrighty, so kind of moving through the earlier years, moving into sort of this middle part as we're moving through the 30s on into the 40s. One of the things that I point out that helped the survival of art in Chicago, where Harlem started to fall away, there are a couple of things. One is what's called the FAP, or the Federal Arts Project. This was one of the initiatives of the Roosevelt administration, that's the FDR Roosevelt, and so that's part of all of that New Deal, WPA, all of that umbrella that was designed to help people in Depression-era America. The FAP, or we call it the FAP, that's how it looks in my notes. But the Federal Arts Project was geared primarily to help artists. So it was geared towards employing artists. They give them commissions. You could do murals, you could do posters, you could teach, you could work at art centers, all these things. So during a time when everybody's broke and artists are more broke than ever, here was a way for artists to earn a decent living. If you could qualify, and they made you jump through some hoops, trust me and believe me, but if you could qualify, you could get a little steady check for doing your thing. Part of it, when I talk about the Art Crafts Guild, this was really the brainchild of a man named George Neal. George Neal is an artist. He had a career as an illustrator and a sign painter. And what he did is on Sundays, he held classes for young artists. And he went to the Art Institute at night. I like to think of him as something of a Robin Hood. He took the knowledge that he got in night school at the Art Institute and he brought it back home and he shared it with his students. What he also did is he got involved with the Chicago Artists Union. If you can imagine that, we used to have a union, folks, which was downtown, so you know what that means. But he went downtown and worked with these folks and campaigned to get more African American artists included on this federal art project so that more of us could get some of that cheddar doing the work that we do best. So he's influential in a lot of ways. And so he had a number of proteges. And so back to, again, we're talking about the survival and that FAP. Not only were individual artists getting paid, but there were also initiatives in place to create art centers. This idea of building places where people could take classes, show their work, and so on. Again, this was a national initiative. There were easily about 100 of these centers put up all over the country, including ours, the Southside Community Arts Center. We'll talk more about that one in a moment. But again, the Southside Community Arts Center is a product of this era. Again, the efforts of people like George Neal, Margaret Burroughs, along with this government sponsorship that certainly helped matters along. So let's see. Let's find a few proteges, shall we? This one here, if you missed the retrospective at the Art Institute, I pity the fool. This is Charles White. He had a magnificent show that just ended here at the Art Institute. Absolutely stunning. Okay, so again, another academically trained artist and someone who probably from the onset of his career has had an eye on Black America and the changes we go through and the beauty of our people and so on. And again, those of you who went to the retrospective, you already know this. If not, Google the man, trust me, okay? The brother's fierce. And also, too, one of the few artists that we see really making it more as a draftsman, as a printmaker. So many artists we see are painters, so it's really refreshing to see someone who can draw. Just draw with pencil and charcoal, good old-fashioned stuff. But again, he still had an eye on the plight of Black people in America. Because what we're dealing with in the 30s now, artistically, there's a move towards what's called social realism, both abroad as well as here in America. And it's in America, it's manifesting as this need to sort of show the world as it is, a sort of nitty gritty, keep it real kind of impetus is what's influencing the art of this time. So instead of us just drawing, pretty ladies and pretty people in the park and kings and Jesus, we're painting ghettos now. We're dealing with, children that are hungry and people being discriminated against and poor housing and so on. And you're seeing this across a wide variety of media. This is the time of photographers on the flip side, like Dorothea Lange or Louis Hine, who are basically giving us a sense of what's happening in the Dust Bowl, what's happening to poor migrant farmers during this time, what's happening to poor children whose parents don't have any money and they have to work in factories. So this sort of nitty-gritty, keep it real impetus is really permeating the country. And again, largely funded through that FAP too. So let's see, who else we got up in here? Here's Elzir Couture. So he's another one of George Neal, I call him the George Neal proteges, but definitely someone who's come through the Southside Community Arts Center. And really very interesting young man, name and fancy chair aside. He's someone who's looking at art of Africa. And remember, you know, you guys remember your Harlem Renaissance history. Elaine Locke was trying to tell people back in the 20s, hey, look to Africa for inspiration. We're always looking to France and Europe and all these other folks for inspiration. That's perfectly valid inspiration. But why not look to your own heritage as a source of inspiration as well and find value in that? And then the younger Turks took it further and said, well, not only do we have culture over here in Africa, but we have culture over here in America that's worth looking at as well. So these artists are examining all of that. So again, you know, we had to have that Harlem mention. So Couture, what's happening towards the more developed part of his career, again, he's looking at figures, African sculpture. And you know, he's saying, well, why should Picasso have all the fun and do this cubist stuff? I can look at this stuff and find beauty in our heritage as well. And so you see these elongated forms, these elongated nudes, sort of rounded forms. They're almost like he's painting sculpture in a way. And he's noted for being one of the few painters that's dealing with dignified images of the African-American female nude. Here you're seeing, because if you think, you know, again, this time frame, we're still seeing jigaboo images, we're still seeing images of black women in salacious positions and things like that. Again, that's another lecture for another time. So for him to come forth and say, hey, this is an image that deserves to be elevated, that deserves to be shown with dignity, was really a breakthrough for his time. Let's give you another one, shall we? So this one here is not only you've got your nude, but also you've got this really fun sort of compositional play. When you look at all the bodies sort of stretched around and how he made them all fit together, you know, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube in a painting. But what he's also doing here is he's showing again that social realist impetus towards showing the plight of Black America. How the Great Migration may not have been quite so great, how a lot of people ran away from the problems post-Reconstruction and lynching and things in the South to be pushed into these tenements, often, you know, built for one family, maybe 2, 3, 4 families staying in one apartment. So these cramped conditions and this poverty, again, is coming up even in, you know, this display of this lovely reclining nude. Here's Gordon Parks. Okay, pop quiz time, pop quiz time. What do we know Gordon Parks for? What are the 2 things that we know Gordon Parks for? In the back there. Sesame Street, not quite. Oh, that's a Gordon, but that's a different Gordon, not that. We give you half credit on that. All right, come on, what do we know Gordon Parks for? Who said it? Shaft. Say it louder. Shaft. Shaft, and what else?
Sweetback.
Not Sweetback, that was Melvin Van Peebles, close. Superfly, let me see, not that one. Okay, I'll give it to you. That was the Learning Tree. Okay. But also Shaft. So so in addition to being, now here's a guy who was a straight up Renaissance man. This guy was a photographer, filmmaker, musician, poet. I mean, just amazing. The range of things that this man could do were just nothing short of amazing. So yeah, so you guys, so we get the extra credit back there for Shaft, okay? But he was also a fashion photographer. He made his living shooting high fashion models for high fashion magazines and so on like that. But also, he turned his camera, when he was away from work, he turned his camera back to the hood. And so he did profiles like this of young black men in the hood. And so just like, you know, our brothers can have our troubles and our struggles now, even back then, he's kind of showing their dignity, even as they're facing poverty and despair and violence and all this other stuff, he's still showing them with a certain dignity. And so this particular series on Red Jackson is a particularly interesting one. Again, portraits of African-American males that we don't often see, and we still don't really see enough of them today, folks. Think about it. When's the last time you saw a painting of a young African-American male that wasn't all bugged out? That's something to think about. All right, let's see. A little bit more on Gordon Parks. This is one of my favorite, absolute favorite. Most of you guys have seen the classic American Gothic by Grant Wood. It's the lady and the guy with the pitchfork. So he's riffing off of that title. Thank you. I was riffing a little too much there. Okay, so he's riffing off of that title, that American Gothic, that sort of, ooh, these are the solid things that America stands for, hard-working Protestant ethic. So in a way, she's Protestant ethic on steroids. This is a story of Ella. Ella is basically single grandmother. She's taking care of her daughter's children. Her daughter is sick, and so she's taking care of several small children, working as a washerwoman, basically as a janitor in the White House. Okay, I was just waiting for the hush to fall over the crowd. So he's pointing out that irony, just like the American Gothic had the pitchfork and the man and the woman, here Ella has no mate. You know, she's the woman who wears the glasses and, dare I say, the proverbial pants. She's the one that's got to work hard just to make ends meet, and at the end of the day, make it to some lousy tenement where she's got to take care of all these children. And again, Gordon Parks puts it so eloquently, only in America. And of course, no analysis of Bronzeville would be complete without the inimitable Margaret Burroughs. So you talk about me being Jamaican and wearing all the many hats. This woman's an educator, a writer, a poet, a prison activist, an institution builder, and so on, and so on. And you can easily run out of breath. But I'll remind you that she's also an artist. She's a painter. She has a couple of paintings in the collection of the Art Institute. And she's also a printmaker. So again, that's a whole nother discussion, the dynamics of printmaking, but do understand that she cut that image from a piece of linoleum to make the print. So anything you see that's white in there had to be carved out to give you a sense of the process. A good chunk of her work seemed to deal with Black positivity. She wanted to show images of things like mother and children, beautiful classic Madonna type things, and also people getting along, whites and blacks and folks all being able to read together and play together and sit on the bus together and so on. There's a viaduct in Hyde Park, I want to say 56th Street? Don't quote me on that, but there's one viaduct that's just dedicated just to the work of Dr. Burroughs. I'm going to put a little one in here. I have a couple of favorites. This one is among one of my favorites. I love it because it really shows her skill as a printmaker. You really see all the different patterns that come in there, all the different textures that, again, she's carving into linoleum to make this print. And again, it kind of veers off the path of, you know, kind of what you normally see of her work. But also, too, as you guys know, she's very interested in history. She's very interested in culture and legacy. So as that pops up in her poetry and in her writing, it also pops up in her artwork. Another favorite of mine is Venus. And I saw this one for the first time at a Fahim Majid installation. He had like wallpaper made up of it, and I was just like, oh my God, I want that. Part of it, I just love the idea of a Black Venus. And then for those of you classical art buffs in the house, it's a riff on Botticelli. Botticelli has the birth of Venus, the goddess of love, as a lovely, slender, blonde woman with flowing locks in the wind blowing on the seashell. Here, she's jet black, riding on what might be a mudfish, which is kind of sacred to Benin culture. I'm going to deem it a mudfish, that's just me, okay? But again, these are some of my favorites of Dr. Burroughs' work. So it's easy in all of her greatness to lose sight of the fact that the woman was an artist as well. And also, she made a grand tour of her own. During this time, a number of, both she, Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, the Tylers, made it down to Mexico. Mexico became another mecca for artists to come down to. Instead of just going to Europe, a number of them studied down there because there's a lot of great stuff happening in Mexico at that time. You're looking at the Mexican muralists. You've got the trifecta, Diego Rivera, Siqueiros, Orozco. You know, it doesn't get any better than that. And these guys are doing public murals and public art all over the place. Artists like Charles White are studying with these guys. Artists like Bill Walker are certainly looking at their work and getting a lot of ideas from these guys. You also have a printmaking shop called the, see if I get this right, Taller Gráfica Popular, or sort of like the print shop for popular graphics, if you will. So artists who are interested in printmaking are getting to study with some of the best printmakers that Mexico had to offer. And their work is vastly improved by that kind of collaboration and cooperation and spending that time. Again, just like artists were going to Europe to study from their masters, here a lot of African-American artists were going to Mexico to study with the Mexican masters. And again, I think their work is even better for that. And so, of course, you know a number of Dr. Burroughs' masterpieces were partly her contribution to the founding of the Southside Community Arts Center in 1940. And this place where we're standing, the DuSable Museum of African American History, which started in her living room, it started in her home. If you can imagine that, it has gone from being a little tiny home museum to being this place. And so the world's a better place for Dr. Burroughs. Shout out to the ancestors up there. Oh, and that's me. Another artist that we don't hear much about is Marion Perkins. And this was a guy who operated a newsstand. So imagine, we're seeing all this amazing art from somebody who still had to hunt for a living. This is somebody that, we should have given him the scholarships and the fellowships and the attention and all that stuff, but still he rose, and still he created these wonderful things. So at the risk of it seeming simple, imagine that he's got to carve that out of a rock, boys and girls. Next time, if you feel that that's an easy thing to do, grab your hammer and chisel and try it. I did, and all I had to show for it was carpal tunnel. But again, amazing work, primarily self-taught. But then, folks started paying attention. Margaret Burroughs, he came to attention to Dr. Burroughs and other folks, and they started, hey, let's get you some schooling and some apprenticeships and so on to build his career and his work. This one here, Man of Sorrows, is a depiction of Jesus. So he's one of those artists that are addressing biblical themes with a black face or with a black physiognomy. You see that in the work of the Clementine Hunter, and again, that's a whole nother chapter. I have to hit that another time. But again, you got the Jesus with the woolly hair. If you look very carefully, you can see the thorns in his hair, the sort of gritty beard, and certainly that sense of pain. If I were up on a cross, I might be in pain too. So this piece, again, we're in the American wing at the Art Institute. It's tucked in a booth in the back in a corner in the dark, so you have to hunt for it, but it is there, and you owe it to yourself to make a pilgrimage to see this beautiful piece for yourself. It's free on Thursdays from 5 to 8, so I'm just saying, okay? Just saying. Also, if you're on public assistance, they have programs for Link and WIC and all that sort of stuff where you get in free. So I ain't trying to shame nobody. I wish I had a Link card so I could get up in there free. But just saying, they're trying to make it accessible for people. You all deserve to be able to see great art and great museums, and this is certainly one of them, but you deserve to go downtown and see it too. Anyway, okay. Okay, another artist who passed through the Southside Community Art Center was Elizabeth Catlett. And she's absolutely, I can't gush enough. It took the Art Institute a while to finally put some of her work in their permanent collection, but you can actually see this piece in the print and drawing room if you make an appointment, along with the sketchbooks of Charles Wright, incidentally. And so this is a woman, again, very powerful race woman. There are numbers of writings that she's written about how black art and black artists had an obligation to forward the cause of the race, to uplift Black America, to uplift our condition. And so her work, pretty much from beginning to end, deals with that, deals with conditions of Black people in America, particularly the plight of women. She eventually left the United States for Mexico because she just got sick of all this racism, all that red baiting, all that McCarthyism, all that stuff. She said, later for y'all. And she went down to Mexico and basically finished out her life and career there. And again, the world's a better place for it because she talks about in her lectures being able to find beautiful stones down there, so the geography actually worked to her advantage in addition to the better social climate. So this is another lino cut. So again, a testament to her skill and her later carpal tunnel, that everything you see there that's not black had to be carved. So the intricacies of the hat, having to carve all that stuff, the intricacies of the hair. I mean, this is skill, boys and girls. This isn't just somebody just kind of doodling on a Saturday afternoon. In addition to being a phenomenal printmaker, she's also a sculptor. And again, like I mentioned before, dealing with these issues central to issues of women, like motherhood, maternity, issues of Mexican women, because eventually she does become a Mexican citizen. So those things pop up in her work as well. So again, you owe it to yourself to take a look at this really, really stunning work. Her last two retrospectives were in Chicago, and I got them both. So moving into the present, fast forward into the present. How am I on time, folks? What time is it?
6:09.
6:09, okay, let me see. All right, I ain't got too much more to go because I know I try to start and end on time because I know folks get fidgety and stuff. So we're gonna hit these contemporaries and then I'll try to leave you wanting more if I can. this is Jesse Howard, and I think Jesse Howard's in the room. Wave to the good people, Jesse. He's a little shy. But I think if anybody truly embodies, if anyone's work embodies social realism for a new millennium, it's the work of Jesse Howard. He has 3 pieces in this show, so definitely go check them out. And I mean, and also too, again, like I mentioned with Charles White, we don't see a lot of draftsmen. We don't see a lot of great work that just happens in charcoal and pencil. So yay for Jesse for reminding us that drawing is really foundation and really can be enough as an art form in and of itself. So you guys owe it to yourself. This is my favorite piece because I just can't get enough of it. And I've watched this man's work over the years and I've just watched it grow and another artist worth looking at is Jonathon Romain, someone who's always given us very dignified images of women and stunning nudes, very stunning, lovely nudes. The one that's in this show is unusually small because Jonathon works at a really large scale, those of you who know his work. So again, go check out a piece that's on an intimate scale. He's doing a lot of great things in, I believe, Peoria as well. He's trying to start an art center down there and really just trying to make things happen. So in that true spirit of Margaret Burroughs and so on, here's someone else coming into a depressed area and really trying to make great things happen. So not just an artist, but also an activist. And since we're on dignified women, I just had to throw Melody Benson-Rosales in there because I just think the first time I saw her work, I was just like, dang! I'm not gonna curse because my elders are in the room, but I was like, dang, man! You know, so she has this pieces in the show. So you see it not only in women of dignity, but women of power. You know, I mean, she's just oozing with Santeria and Vodun. You know, she just looks like, ooh, yeah. Yeah, don't mess with me. And I just think it's stunning. And she's also working on a monumental scale. One of the tricky challenges in doing this show is so much of the work was small. Artists like Kerry James Marshall is trying to encourage African-American artists to work bigger, to work on that monumental scale, that grand scale. Because when you go to the Art Institute and you see the Monets and the Degas and the Renoirs, they're all big. But you know, a lot of us, we don't have the studio space or the money to do those big paintings, so a lot of our stuff is kind of intimate. And Kerry James Marshall is one of those artists who are trying to say, let's try a different, big scale. So hooray for Melody for having the guts and the studio space to work on this kind of scale. Another one giving you dignified women, he's not in this show, but would have been nice if he had been. This is the late Al Tyler. He and his wife were both artists, again, coming through that Bronzeville area, have a significant history through, you know, colleagues of Margaret Burroughs, went down to Mexico and so on. And I included this image because, again, we don't usually see really beautiful images of women of size anymore, especially black women of size. And I just thought it was nice to put that in there, just beautiful, colorful, and vibrant, and just jamming. Another one you may recognize, someone who shares Dr. Burroughs' vision of sort of overcoming racism in her work is Joyce Owens. She's not in this present show, but she was in the 2013 show, and she was a curator of that show as well. Very significant, very substantial career. Definitely worth giving a Google. The piece is over, so not only, again, sort of evidence of academic training, sister comes up, yeah. Okay, but also a firm commitment to addressing racism through her work. So the piece that's on your left is from her Survivor series. She's done a number of paintings of people who have survived slavery. There have been like photo collections that have been gathered, and she's working from those photo collections to paint these people who really try to tell our story, those last surviving remnants of this era that, you know, is now lost to us, except through this documentation. Over on the right is from her Out the Box series. And so part of it's called Out the Box because she actually paints them on crates, so they're actually on boxes. But what she's dealing with here are images that were collected by W.E.B. Du Bois that showed African Americans in positions of uplift, middle class, well-dressed, very well groomed, and so on. And again, this was working counter to the prevailing images of African Americans as pickaninnies and, you know, shufflers and zip coons and so on like that. So these are the, you know, sort of that legacy that Joyce Owens is giving homage to. What a lot of you don't know is that she's quite the race woman as well. So from time to time, she has these images that really kind of hit at racism and kind of hit at it head on. Sometimes she kind of comes at it from the back door, and then sometimes she just gone and gives it a real full fist. And so this one here, Medieval in America, almost defies, doesn't need explanation. But again, you can come see it after class. Another race woman, someone who's relentless in her approach to addressing racism head on, is Candace Hunter. She has a piece in this show. I invite you to go check it out. This piece is from a show that she did, let's see, not here, but at the Southside Community Arts Center called Hooded Truths. And what she did is she used the hoodie, which sort of became emblematic of the whole Trayvon Martin fiasco, and basically took different figures from history and placed them in hoods. So to kind of get that sense of that idea, like, are we just sort of this ubiquitous figure in a hood? Martin Luther King in a hood. Medgar Evers in a hood. The four little girls of Birmingham in hoods. Sort of saying, this idea of, are we really important? Are we of value? Or are we being reduced to a garment of clothing? And so she does numerous figures this way with that hoodie sort of being that ubiquitous signifier, if you will. And this is the piece that's in this show, Sanctuary. So between the churches in Birmingham to Dylan Roof and so on, you can certainly question not only the role of the church, but then, why are we getting attacked in church again? What's up with that, And also, too, I think there's a slight rift. There's also a book called Without Sanctuary, which deals with the history of lynching postcards in America. If you have the stomach for it, you can certainly check that one out. There's a website as well, but you need to have a strong stomach, just letting you know that. And I think few people sort of embody the vibe of a Marion Perkins more so than Stephen Flemister. He's a relatively young artist on the set, certainly one to watch for. He's just recently closed out a show at Rootwork. And what stands out about this piece, to me, it feels like a Marion Perkins, but he made it out of corrugated cardboard. So think about your packing boxes, your supermarket boxes, those brown paper boxes. He's found a way to bond them together and then carve these images out. So they're as monumental as anything stone or almost like an Olmec head or something like that. But I get off on the idea that he did it with something humble. It's not marble, it's not bronze, it's not clay, it's boxes. It's recycled stuff, it's paper. And I think that's really cool. How fresh, how different, how new. And still yet dealing with images of blackness and black physiognomy and the black social condition. Okay, round and bend, I'm almost done, folks, I promise. All right, if we talk about Gordon Parks, if we reach back into Harlem and talk about James Van Der Zee, we talk about folks who are sort of documentarians of our contemporary scene, documentarians of our culture. And so I point Tony Smith out, who's also in the room and who also has work in the show, as one of the documentations of our culture in this time. He's kind of an unsung hero because he's always behind the scenes. You always see him smiling with that camera. But you owe it to yourself to really check out his work and check out his artistry in its own right. Like Gordon Parks, Tony is a fashion photographer. His images of models are nothing short of stunning. I always say, well, one day I want you to shoot me. Because I said, boy, you make them look good, you can make me look good. But aside from that, he does a number of stunning photo series. So many of us have had the black and white treatment in his studio with that big old screw on the window. And he also does really magnificent video work, like the piece that's in there in that room. And again, check him out, because brother played me a little guitar too. And so other projects that he's worked on, he did a whole video project on the Wall of Respect, where he's interviewed all the people that were involved or who saw it or who were affected by it and so on. And so really just a magnificent pastiche of cultural workers and artists and curators and stuff from around the city. Very important document that we were here, that we're making stuff happen. So absolutely magnificent. He was also my documentarian for my Bill Walker project, love you for that. But also too, one of his more recent pieces was a project called Black is Beautiful, where he's just gotten couples and individuals and artists and musicians and all kinds of beautiful people and got to his studio and has given it the Tony Smith treatment. And there's mine. There's mine. So, with that in mind, I'm going to close because I want to leave you wanting more. We're going to try to do another one of these in January because, as you see, my history just ended at about the tail end of the 1940s. We got a lot more to do. We got areas like surrealism and abstract expressionism. They painted what? Maybe next time I could talk about the Black Arts Movement and our role in that, because a good chunk of the Black Arts Movement had its roots right here in Chicago. We can also talk about other collectives like Sapphire and Crystals or the Seven Strong Collective. And we can also talk about the new voices in Chicago, because there's a lot of hip, new, innovative things that are happening in this city. But see, they only gave me an hour, y'all, so y'all gotta come back to see all that good stuff. So hopefully, if y'all like what you heard, tell that little lady over there, let's do it again, and I'll cover those other topics for you. Thank you.
All right.
All right, so what we'll do now for the next couple of minutes that we have, we'll have Juarez come back up, take a few questions, and then we'll do a bit of exhibition exploration. Any questions, please raise your hands. Yes, sir.
Juarez, your presentation and your information was just absolutely wonderful. Your students are lucky to have you. I just wanted to add a few historical points. There are at least 5 different African-American art traditions in this country. Dating from the 16th century, when you had blacks in Mexico, and the area of, from Texas to California was part of Mexico. So there are paintings that survive from that period. You had the Afro-African-American tradition collected before 1750 by Hans Sloane for the British Museum. So you have things going back that far.
Can I go take my notes?
You had black women recognized as artists in the Anglo portion of the country as early as the 1770s, that we find from escaped slave advertisements in the newspapers. And then just one final point about Henry Ossawa Tanner. He was exhibiting here in Chicago in 1893 in the Columbian Exposition. He had solo exhibits at Thurber Art Galleries in 1911 and 1913. So there's a tradition that goes back just literally hundreds and hundreds of years related to African-American art.
All right.
All right.
By the way, one final point. If anybody knows who Rebecca Price is, she did designs for the Artists and Models Ball programs in the 1940s. Please see me and let me know if you know who she is. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, that
Any questions? We have time for two more questions.
Okay.
I'll try to answer them, I promise. Yes.
Cuban artist who lived in Chicago, Emilio Cruz.
I've heard the name. You said Emilio Cruz? I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with his work. Let me look him up.
He taught at the School of Artists too.
Oh, okay. That's really, okay.
Okay.
Cool. And you said Cuban? Okay, thank you. Okay, I had to add that in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Obi.
I just found out that an exhibit closed in Brazil, I think a day or 2 ago. It had stunning images, at least I saw some of them online, of paintings of black people as far back as the 16th century, the 1540s and 50s. And I was wondering if there's any way that the DuSable could contact that museum and maybe get some of those images up here. Because I'd like to see some of those paintings. They have them, black women in garb that looks like Queen Victoria. And I think they'd be a valuable exhibit if we could get it here to Chicago. And I was wondering if there's any way we can do something like that.
What's the name of the show?
I can get that information for you.
Okay.
I can get that for you today, but I don't have it on the top of my head right now.
Okay. Half the battle is just getting a buy-in.
Okay.
Yes.
A great photographer, Robert Sinstat.
Ooh, yes. But see, that's when I covered the 60s. But thank you. Yeah, we have pop a minute. Sinstat, Emilio Cruz.
One notice, that exhibit you were talking about on African American designers in Chicago, Art, Commerce, and the Politics of Race, opens at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. And I previewed it this afternoon, and it is fabulous, lots of stuff. Charles Dawson was also featured at the Cultural Center in 2015, Love for Sale. So you can go online and see all the references to that, and there are lots of examples of his work.
And when you all do visit that exhibition, please take note there are several objects and pieces of art from the DuSable's very own collection, and we are proud to support that exhibition. So what we're going to do now for the next couple of minutes is do a bit of exhibition exploration. If you've not yet seen this amazing collection, we do invite you to do so. And as Juarez mentioned, I have taken it down. We will have our next event in January. We'll have you back. So we hope to see you all again. Any questions about the museum, please ask me. Any other questions about the exhibition, please ask the lovely Juarez. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.